For business professionals new to design, it is easy to make the assumption that design is all about how something looks, how pretty it is, or how it fits with your company's image or brand. But that is a false assumption. Design, or rather good design, has more to do with how well something functions, whereas bad design fails to consider the person's needs and experiences using the product. The late Steve Jobs once said this: "Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works." I love this as a quote, with or without the context, because as amateur designers working in PowerPoint, it is easy to get caught up in all those little tools in PowerPoint. Tools like themes and templates, smart art, charts and diagrams, picture styles and shading, animations and transitions, and more features, it seems, coming every day. And this isn't a bad thing. They're just features, just tools. But like any tool, it takes time and practice to learn how to use those tools well and in what contexts. The first time I picked up a tool in woodshop, I wasn't expected to build a full-scale working mansion with it. No, I built a tiny subpar birdhouse first. And yet, on the job, it seems our audiences, or even ourselves, expect us to build mansions all the time in PowerPoint with just 20 minutes of self-directed exploration of the interface or less. And just like designing a house, there's a lot more to designing a presentation than knowing how to use the tool. And so, to create a design that works, we need to choose a design that complements and supports the number one most important aspect of your presentation, and that is your message. So, when you sit down to write your speech or your presentation, you should be asking yourself these questions. What is my primary message? What is my number one goal in delivering this message? And how do I best visualize this message? And then, when you have answers to these questions, then you can begin to think about the design. Designing slides is a lot like cooking for other people. My mother hates spicy food. Simple black pepper is even a bit too much for her to handle. Yet my brother grows his own ghost peppers and Carolina Reapers. He'd put hot sauce on his breakfast cereal if his wife would let him. So, as you can imagine, if I were to cook for either one of them in mind, the way I would season a dish would differ greatly. The audience is different. And recipes often plan for these taste differences. Take, for example, the cooking instruction, season to taste. Just like cooking with ingredients, you might have parts of a recipe that need to be followed to the letter, but other parts allow or imply some creative freedom, like the instruction, season to taste. Taste is very much a personal preference in many instances, and has a lot to do with the audience you are cooking for. If I were to cook for either my mom or my brother, I would season a dish differently. My audience is different, and so I need to make some adjustments. Just like here in PowerPoint, all components must work together to balance each other out. So you'll need to adjust your design components often to meet your audience's taste, not to mention your company's business requirements, just like a recipe. But the thing is, not every aspect of design comes down to a matter of personal taste and requirements. That would make design a rather trivial field of study, which it is most certainly not. There are situations, environmental, social, and biological factors that will most certainly influence the design. As for the individual design components, we'll be spending a lot of this course talking about balancing individual components on a slide, talking about what to do, and at times what not to do, like how too many colors can cause chaos, or with some specific color combinations, you can even cause seizures. Yes, seizures. That's what I mean by biology influencing design. Certain color combinations or bright contrasting patterns shown together, striped or flashing, can trigger headaches and seizures for photosensitive individuals. And what this teaches us is that something as simple as color is far more serious than we ever thought possible. As far as the environment goes, it too has a huge impact on how slides are viewed and perceived by your audience. Imagine sitting here in this huge auditorium. Can you read this slide? I know I couldn't. Environment such as screen or font size or even lighting impacts your slides. Social design. Well, think about it. Speaking to this audience is a very different experience than speaking to this audience. So why would you design for them any different? So what we are going to be studying here together is not the end-all be-all of PowerPoint slide design. This is just the beginning. And in the beginning of any design talk, we break things down into design elements. In this course, we're not going to be talking about all possible design elements, but a handful of key elements just to get you started. First off, there's hierarchy. Hierarchy in design is simply when one design element appears more important in comparison to other elements on the slide. Space, also known as white space or negative space, refers to the empty places or the separation between elements on the slide. We'll also be talking about similarity and contrast as well. Now, these two components work closely together to communicate a variety of different relationships. And finally, color. Color as a design component has a very specific purpose, and it is not for decoration, it's for attraction. This and all the other design components we will be discussing in more depth, so stay tuned. Throughout this course, you will hear me talk about 3 design pillars often. They are audience, environment, and your message. I call them pillars because they should be bracing your design at any given moment. Take any one of these pillars away, and your design isn't as structurally sound. First up, consider your audience when designing. The first thing I tell anyone when I talk about presentations or effective communication is that communication is about community. The whole point of delivering a talk is to inspire action or change, to communicate an idea to someone. Essentially, this isn't about the words or the idea then. This is about the people, to get the people to do something or feel something or to think differently, to share your point of view and experiences or goals. And somehow, this is a detail that is often forgotten during preparation, where the focus turns too much on the presenter or the slides themselves. Your slides are all about those people, and it's not about you or your company. When we sit down to write our speech or think of what we want to communicate, somehow during that process, we tend to either become laser analytical, focusing entirely on our thoughts and message or our sales pitch, and we become a little self-centered, focusing on how we will appear in front of a mass of people out of fear of public speaking. We tend to visualize ourselves, but you are speaking to other people, and so your focus should be on those other people, even in this creation stage, especially in the creation stage, whether you are writing or designing your slides, because the tone you set for this audience here is a very different tone than the one you set for this audience here. Audience makes a big difference, and you can't package the same design and the exact same speech for vastly different audiences and expect similar results. So consider your audience when designing. Next, the environment is a design pillar. And here, I'm not talking about recycling. I'm talking about the context for which you are presenting. Now, most people think of an in-person presentation behind a podium, but are you delivering an in-person presentation in front of 10 people, 300 people, or 300,000 people? Or is this a recorded presentation like this one? Think of how you are watching this presentation right now, in front of a TV screen or in front of a small iPhone. Maybe you are hearing impaired and reading this text in closed caption. Well, I have news for you. Where you are presenting has a huge impact on slide design. You'll need to make some adjustments according to where your slides will be projected based on the size of the screen, even the lighting and color of the room or quality of the projector. And often, There's not a good way to predict or anticipate a lot of these things too far in advance. And finally, the last pillar is the most obvious one. It's your primary message, your whole reason for giving a presentation in the first place. Your design shouldn't be a distraction from your message. Your message shouldn't be in competition with design. Design should work with your message at all times. In some ways, your design is your message, just like your audience and the environment is your message as well. And yet, all too often, I find that presenters are uncomfortable with empty areas of their PowerPoint slides and feel the need to fill that space with arbitrary clip art or images that have nothing to do with what they're talking about. Like this slide. This slide lists 10 migraine symptoms. Why is there a picture of a duck? Psychologists have a name for this. It's called visual dissonance, or if that's too hard for you to remember, I like to call it a what the duck moment. It's a state of tension when one experiences a disparity between what one expects to see and what one actually sees. And when presenters throw arbitrary things on PowerPoint slides, like this duck, just because there is a blank area of the slide that they don't know what to do with, they are unintentionally creating visual dissonance for their audience. Now, what that means for their audience is that they are now no longer paying attention to what the presenter has to say or paying attention to the content on the slide. They're looking at this darn duck and trying to figure out what it has to do with the subject of migraines. In other words, they are missing the entire point of the lecture. And that's bad. It's better to remove the duck at this point. Always better to have no duck, an unbalanced plain design, than to have your audience confused and not listening to you or your message. Sure, they'll remember the duck and maybe that you were talking about migraines, but none of the signs of migraines, which was the point of the slide. So, bottom line is this. In general, you want your message to coincide with your visuals and your overall design. Do that along with focusing on your audience and keeping a close, mindful watch on where and how your presentation will be held, and you will be in a good position. When looking at this slide, where do you look first? What do you see next? What about now? The design elements on the page haven't changed, yet your eyes now focus and notice different parts of the design now that they are sized and composed differently. What about now? Yeah, now you just don't know where to look. This is uncomfortable, isn't it? Designers, through size, shape, color, saturation, and texture, can manipulate how an onlooker will approach their design. If everything is too big, the design will scream, and the audience will not know what words are the most important. If everything is too colorful, no one color stands out. When one element differs greatly from other elements, the viewer has no choice but to pay attention. It dominates. Here we have an example of dominance through color. Take these gray circles, for example. By themselves, they are overwhelming to look at, almost dizzying. But if we add color to one circle, our eyes immediately know where to look. Or if we remove the color and then change the location of one circle, or maybe the size, the saturation of several circles, we have a clear, distinct place on our slide for our viewers to notice, to know where to look first, next, and last, and can then attempt to interpret some meaning from simple, ordinary circles. We can even literally communicate with them through design this way. All of these are examples of something called dominance. Dominance is closely related to contrast, which we'll be talking about later. But dominance is when one element is visually more important than all the other elements on the slide through contrast, visual weight, or direction. These two squares are equal. No one square dominates the other. But now this is a far more engaging design. It tells a different story. Our eyes go to the larger square first because it dominates the slide. And if you grew up with a big, mean, hyperactive older brother like I did who dominated your childhood, you might now feel really sorry for that tiny square off in the corner all by itself. Poor little square. Now, this next example, we've got a bit more going on. The most dominant element on the slide is this big, bright orange square in the upper left-hand corner of the slide for, well, a few reasons. Number 1, its color. Number 2, its size. And 3, its position on the slide. People typically read from top to bottom and left to right in this region, usually in one of 2 distinct patterns depending on the type of content, either in an F shape or a Z shape. In addition to our dominant shape, we have other areas of the slide that our eyes are naturally drawn to. Why? Through the color. They're shades of the same or similar color, that is, creating what is known as focal points on the slide. A focal point is an element or area of emphasis within the design that draws similarities from that dominant element. So why am I telling you all of this in a movie about the need for hierarchy in PowerPoint design? Well, the way you create visual hierarchy is by creating levels of dominance or focal points within the design and throughout your presentation, either per slide or across all slides. But most importantly, and if you take anything away from this video, it should be this: your slide's visual hierarchy should be tied to your content's hierarchy. So, if you are accustomed to drafting an outline for your presentation, you should be cross-referencing it for your slide designs, not importing that outline as your design. Because I've got news for you. The traditional PowerPoint layout with the title plus bullet point layout that just looks like an outline, that doesn't work for most audiences and environments and isn't the best way to visualize most messages. So remember, when designing your slide's visual hierarchy should mirror your content structure. Bullet points, or rather this title and content layout that has been so popular in professional and academic settings, has a natural hierarchy because of the way most of us read. We read from left to right, top to bottom. At least on paper, that's how most of us work. But that is not how we work in the real world. At our computers, this is how we work. We spread out at our desks, often across multiple monitors. I know I do. And we compare the content on one screen to the content at another, switching back and forth between the windows. It's not very up and down or linear. We jump back and forth to make leaps and connections as needed. In a presentation, in our title and content slide, when we shove our content into this layout, what that means for our bullet points, unfortunately, is that they will always be read and seen in a linear and hierarchical order, an observation which some critics of PowerPoint and slideware, like Edward Tufte, argue corrupt and weaken verbal and spatial thinking. People rarely go back and forth in this layout to compare. They read and then they zone out. Visually, this ready-made layout is damaging to your message if your message doesn't fit into the structure. This structure communicates something very specific about your content through the position and size. It says that this is the most important piece of information, and this is the least important piece of information, and these bullets are equal in importance and meaning. Now, sometimes that is the case, but a lot of times when I see content placed in these bullets on the slides, that is not how the speaker intends the meaning, and the visual does not match the meaning of the content in terms of its hierarchy. Another problem with bullets is that the bullet points are more akin to speaker notes, the outline that presenters create to help jog their memory about their talking points. All too often, presenters put their own speaker notes on the slides and use PowerPoint as their own personal teleprompters, forgetting that PowerPoint is a visual aid for their audience, not for the speaker. Remember the 3 design pillars. Audience is the first one, so design for your audience, not for you. So if you find that you are slapping a bunch of bullet points on a slide so you won't forget what you need to say during a meeting or a lecture, you are doing your audience a disservice. Now, I want to be careful here. I don't want to demonize bullet points like some presentation designers out there have. There are times when bullet points are desirable and necessary. In fact, I've dedicated an entire movie to this topic. It is that important. There are situations where your content will be cognitively and spatially appropriate for a bulleted list. It's just that not all content fits into the structure, and unfortunately, most of PowerPoint's early formative years saw only the structure. On another note, bullet points, like any other design element like color or type, can be overused. Like that recipe and the instructions seasoned to taste, there is not a hard, fast rule, like the 166 rule. See, there's this idea that there should only be one idea per slide, no more than 6 bullet points per slide, and no more than 6 words per bullet point. It's totally complete nonsense and not based on anything scientific or proven. It's a made-up rule. But it's a very popular rule. What is based on scientific research, though, anytime you overuse one layout or one element over and over again, like this, people will eventually stop paying attention to what you are showing them. This is not a new phenomenon, and one that is not specific to PowerPoint. In psychology, this phenomenon is known as habituation, a form of learning in which an organism decreases or ceases to respond to a stimulus after repeated presentations. In web design, this phenomenon is known as banner blindness, when users become accustomed to the website after seeing the banner ads over and over again in the same space, even if the content is different. And this happens either consciously or subconsciously, meaning people may not know that they are not seeing the content. So, bottom line, for PowerPoint templates, whether you are using a stock Microsoft built or company provided template, if you lean on one layout too much or too heavily, presentation after presentation, you run the risk of habituating your audience. But more importantly, you should be choosing layouts and visual structures that complement and support your content. There will be times when bullet points are perfectly appropriate depending on the nature of the content you are communicating. And for this, let's stop for a moment and think about what bullet points really are. They are a list. I don't know about you, but I write lists every time I go to the grocery store. If I don't, I end up spending twice as much time and money and forgetting about half the things I meant to buy somehow. So in essence, this list is from memory, but it can be a little bit more than just that. Lists are often used to weigh options, or to organize ideas, or to solidify structures or the steps necessary for long-term planning. Likewise, it makes sense that in communicating these steps, these same structures might also be sometimes necessary to show. So when do we use lists on slides? Well, we use lists to show or to communicate chronological steps, or how to do something in a specific order. I need to go here, then I need to go here. And I should mention that at this point, I use the term bullets interchangeably with numbers. A list is a list in PowerPoint's eyes, whether it contains a symbol or not. In addition to chronological steps, we also use bullets to show the order of importance. This item is more important than this item, which is more important than this item, which is more important than this item, and so on. And we also use bullets to show group membership. Everything in this group belongs to this item, and everything over here belongs to this item. And so, there is meaning behind the structure of the bulleted list, one that should mirror the message you pair within that structure. The problem, though, is that oftentimes the presentations that I see, content is crammed into a bulleted structure that would be better served in another structure. Take this slide, for example. At a quick glance, it looks like a fine bulleted list, not very pretty. We can apply a PowerPoint stock template or make a design ourselves. It doesn't change the content, though, or how the content is presented. Remember, content is king. So looking at the content, what is it trying to communicate? The second bullet point seems to answer a question contained in the first bullet point, and the remaining bullet points seem to offer some kind of pro and con comparison of social media strategies. As such, this type of information most definitely does not belong in a single linear list-like structure. In fact, what we have here is not a PowerPoint problem or a design problem. What we have here is a content problem. If a client handed me the slide, the first step would be to sit down and figure out what their social media strategy is and what they were trying to express in this presentation. But without that information, if for some reason I couldn't get that information, here is how I would redesign the slide. First, I would split the content across 3 separate slides. If I can't fix the content, at least I can break it up in a way that doesn't contradict visually what the content is communicating. And now that the content is broken apart, now I can go in and design each individual slide in a way that fits each individual message, tweaking the wording here and there, hoping to cut some of the words while preserving the message. It still won't fix the overall cohesiveness of the presentation or the content, but at least the design won't be in the way of each individual engagement tip that is shared. Here's yet another example of a bulleted list. Now let's examine this content. The title is in a different place. It's in a different location off to the left instead of at the top of the slide. But that doesn't really make a difference. It is still clearly the title that is describing the list off to the right. And the bulleted list, even though there are no symbols, it is still clearly a list. How can we make this bullet list better? Well, we can't. This is a perfect example of a perfect use for a bullet list. These items are all members of a group. They are all examples of types of network cables. So, as you can see here, there are times when bullets do have their place. They just don't come up as often as you'd think when giving a presentation. Just remember, double check your lists and ask yourself when using bullets, is this information organized chronologically, by importance, or by group membership? If your content is not, you should probably consider redesigning your slides. In the very rare event that you do have a presentation with valid uses of the bullet list structure used over and over again that is getting a bit repetitive, or if you are just simply looking for alternative ways to structure the information, chunking has become quite popular in slide design in recent years. A friend and colleague of mine, fellow PowerPoint MVP Nolan Hames, presents about this all over the place, as do many of my fellow PowerPoint MVPs and presentation designers. Everyone is doing it, even Microsoft. So, what is chunking? Chunking, simply put, is where you take something that is long and break it up and organize it into smaller, bite-sized pieces. And this is nothing new or specific to slide design. Chunking has its roots in document design, as well as web design. In many ways, slide design has more in common with the chunked layouts you'll see on the web, but with less text and a cleaner, more bold design like you might find on billboards. So chunking on slides very much carries its own connotation. So let's take a look and see how chunking can work for a simple bulleted list. Now, we are all familiar with this layout. This is our typical title and content slide layout that has been around quite a while in PowerPoint. Kind of boring, especially with only these 3 tiny little bullets. But if I take that same bulleted list and spread that content out horizontally across the slide, somehow that information is easier to explore. My eyes can go back and forth over the items to comprehend and compare them more readily. Now, this is a really simple example that takes no more time to create than a bullet list. Or I can pair the bulleted text with a meaningful image or icon, or really redesign things. This is still chunking. All we're adding here is some rectangle shapes to the background and playing around with the placement, size, and color of the text within the rectangles. As far as how to do this quickly and easily in PowerPoint, there are some tools that will help you line up the content quickly on the slide. Let me show you. So on the first slide in PowerPoint, here I have just a very simple title-only slide where I've taken the content from your typical bulleted list and cut them and pasted them as individual text boxes just to make them a little bit easier to arrange on the slide. Now to arrange them horizontally across the slide, I'm going to be using some really cool tools in PowerPoint to arrange this content. Now most people typically will try to space them out on the slide and kind of eyeball it, but that takes a really long time and it's really hard to do, to eyeball. But if we take our mouse and with our arrow, just click and drag to kind of lasso all of the text boxes at once, from the Home tab in that drawing group, you'll see this Arrange button. Clicking on that, you'll see a lot of different position object options under this Align group. In this menu, you'll see Align Left, Align Center, and all of these other options here. Now, all of these tools up here have two options. These are kind of like a toggle switch. There's Align to Slide and Align Selected Objects. You want to make sure the checkbox is selected for Align Selected Objects. Next, we want to choose the option Align Top. That will make sure that all of the objects are spaced to the top of each other rather than the slide. Then we want to go back to that Arrange group, click Align again, and then we want to distribute them horizontally, and that will space them evenly with each other. Now on slide number 2, we have 3 images here that we can then go back and add to this first slide if we like. So going back here, grabbing hold of the first image, that's going to be our image for the New York. So I'm just going to copy that and paste that on our first slide. And we could resize that, move that into position here. I'm just going to grab these real quick and paste them and position them above their corresponding bullet point. And now it looks a little cramped up here. And so if I want to lasso all these together and then move the whole thing down as one unit, I'm going to hold down my Shift key and then just nudge this down ever so slightly. And really, that's all you need to do to chunk out your images and text on a slide. If you were to do a casual search on the internet for the top 5, top 8, or top 10 tips to make your PowerPoint slides look great, no doubt you'd find a lot of the same generic advice in some of those top type lists that may or may not be helpful to your exact situation. Take this advice. Keep it simple. Look at this slide itself. You can't get any simpler than a white background with dark text with 3 simple words centered on it. It's a simple design, a simple font, delivering a simple piece of advice. I found this exact piece of advice across many different websites promising help for better, more effective, and more beautiful slides. Heck, I have probably given this advice myself to people in the past. But recently, I started to not like this advice. This advice, like the message, is simple and can help people who overburden their slides with just too much stuff. But unfortunately, the advice is oversimplified in my opinion, for it begs the question, keep what simple? And it implies but neglects to directly address an element often overlooked in slide design. My favorite element to design with, space. Consider this. Let's go back to that last slide, but this time we're going to change one thing about that message. Our message itself hasn't changed, nor have the colors, the fonts, just the size of the text. Rather, this space around the text has changed. And as a result, the text is shouting. The slide looks cramped and uncomfortable. The slide is no longer simple, and now the overall design contradicts the simplicity of the message. That's bad. Space is an important part of any design. Looking at this slide, the audience may only notice the words, even when they don't make much sense. But that is made possible because of the space that surrounds the words. That space, in and of itself, is a powerful element that assists the other design elements. It's that space that creates separation between objects and can help guide viewers' eyes to specific points within the design. When reading paragraphs of text like these, space helps us determine what's a word, a sentence, and of course, the end of a paragraph, not to mention the confines of a page or slide. Without those spaces, the readability would be gone and the text would be very difficult to read. But beyond passive uses of space like this to improve readability or legibility, space can also be active and used purposefully within a slide. Active space, I like to think of as carefully considered emptiness. I have no idea who came up with that phrase. I heard it somewhere a long time ago and committed it to memory, but then promptly forgot who said it. But space can help bring harmony and balance to a design, and even help convey a particular tone to a work. As such, space is a much needed and necessary element to consider when planning and designing your slides. In the next few videos, join me as we dive into learning how to utilize space and incorporate space effectively in our presentations. Before I begin to talk about the personality of space, I have a bit of a design confession. When I was in high school, I was given a design project as an assignment that I completely forgot about. We had to design a bumper sticker that represented who we were as teenagers at that moment in time. Before class, friends of mine were showing off their elaborate and artfully designed rectangles, representing their various hobbies, interests, and bright futures. And I had nothing. Just nothing. Well, this A student panicked. I whipped out a blank sheet of paper, staring at the emptiness, freaking out, muttering, "What do I do? What do I do? There are so many possibilities." And so I wrote that. The possibilities are endless, in tiny small letters in the center, in pencil, with a ton of white space all around. I got an A. And ever since, I have been both equally proud and ashamed of that moment. There are times when an abundance of space is by accident, or unintentional, or done for convenience, or done for money, or time constraints, like my earlier example. But that doesn't mean that it is wasted space. When a design or a slide contains an abundance of empty space, also known as white space, even though this space is often not necessarily white, and when this is intentional and used purposefully, the look creates a very specific tone and effect depending on how it is used. An abundance of empty space can be used to create a sense of calm, peace, inaction, or stillness. It can be cold like snow or marble, or creamy like milk. An abundance of empty space can also imply wealth or luxury. Space can also be clean, sacred, or infinite. And on the other hand, too much space can be lonely or imply poverty, theft, or someone or something lost or missing. There is a lot of meanings that space can take on. Problems arise in design when space contradicts the intended message or tone. You wouldn't want to create a slide deck for a discount furniture store advertising the sale of the season and show them the openness of this space. Nor does this stark, lonely environment say this is the space to send your child to daycare. Let's take a moment and examine some slightly flawed slides to see what we can do to make the personality of their spaces work a little bit better. There are many things that are just not great with this one slide. The use of space is just one tiny aspect of what's going on wrong here. The hand and the light bulb, not crazy about that image. And the message is quite verbose. I don't know about you, but that bullet point there, that is really bugging me, especially since there's only one bullet and it's a sentence. To cut down on the use of plastic water bottles, invest in a good, reusable, environmentally friendly stainless steel water bottle. Eesh, that's a mouthful. So here are some possible revisions. First off, I'm ditching the hand holding the light bulb. That's just a visual cliche. Next, we need to pare down the wording a bit to really focus in on what we are trying to communicate. Remember our pillar, our message? What is our message here? What's the action? To invest? No, to buy something. An environmentally friendly stainless steel water bottle? That's really long. Let's cut that down to just the essentials. Now, with the words that are left, we're going to need to rearrange them to make it make more sense. Now our message is phrased as an action and only contains the most important words. Buy a stainless steel water bottle to cut down on plastic waste. Now we're ready to find photographs. Here's one that follows that green ideas theme. Let's see how it works with our text. Now this part might take some tweaking, but the obvious text placement is in the blank area off to the left of the plant. I've broken the lines of text up so that the words water bottle finish the first line and the plastic waste finish the second line. People tend to see and remember, or at least notice, the final words of lines more. I also didn't want to split my infinitive to cut onto two separate lines either. As for the placement of the text, I thought it looked best in line with the top of the plant, since that is the focal point of the photograph. That way, the flow of the slide travels this way from left to right and then down the plant here. Now, the problem, though, is that I don't think this image is the best one for our message. Sure, we're talking about green ideas, but we're also talking about plastic waste, too. Personality-wise, do we want to emphasize nature, cutting down on plastic, or the steel water bottle? Here's another possibility. Now we're getting a little bit closer to something. Now I've intentionally moved the text down to eye level so the woman is staring at the text. People will naturally look at what others are looking at. The text is also close to the object it describes. Now, personally, I think I would keep hunting for a better photograph, as I think the model here is a little bit too prominent in the photo. I've actually added a gradient shape overlay over her to try and minimize her appearance a bit, to try to draw a little bit more focus to the water bottle to make it shine a little bit more. Here's what the photo looks like without that gradient overlay, by the way. If you want to learn a little bit more about how to create gradients, check out our other PowerPoint courses in our library. But we definitely are getting closer to a photograph that works for the personality of our message and the space of our design. At one point in your career, you might have created or seen slides that looked like this, with a whole lot of text crammed onto the slide. And now, you may have started to create slides or seen slides that looked more like this, with full color images as the background, with just a few keywords on them. This particular slide style was made immensely popular thanks to Gar Reynolds, author of the books Presentation Zen and Presentation Zen Design. That's quite the pendulum swing in the opposite direction, isn't it? I just think that it is fascinating how we've moved from cramming in so much information to putting almost nothing on our slides. Some might even argue it's an overcorrection. Personally, I think it depends on the situation. I argue that slides need to always be designed for your audience. The Presentation Zen style is fantastic and beautiful if you are presenting in front of large audiences. But for small boardroom or classroom environments where the expectation of your colleagues and students is to have the PowerPoint deck travel with them as their notes or action items, it's not very helpful having only a handful of out-of-context words to read or reference later. And creating a separate handout is time-consuming and not always feasible. So, what does all of this have to do with active and passive space? In the past, we never really had to think too much about space. We didn't have much to work with. But now that presenters are aware that too much text overwhelms viewers and that people can't read and listen at the same time and are paring down their message, they are now faced with a new problem. And that problem is, what do I do with all of this extra slide space? And there is not a quick and easy answer to that question. You have to train yourself to start seeing space differently and learn how to activate space in a way that positively affects your subject and your message. So, how do we do that? Well, first, we need to understand the different kinds of space, most namely, passive and active space. When you center all your content on the slide, like I've done here, you are essentially creating passive space. And if you think of it in terms of your slide placeholders, it makes sense. With centered text, PowerPoint will push the text outward as you type so that space on either side is an afterthought, or not even a thought really. It's not usable space unless you limit the confines of your placeholder or the padding. As for the rest of the slide as a whole, all of the unused space is really not used purposefully. All of our content is centered on our slide. This isn't a bad thing, not necessarily. Not especially exciting or compelling. It's very safe, predictable. Sometimes you will want to pair those adjectives with your content and your message. Other times, you won't. Asymmetrical designs, on the other hand, are much more interesting to look at. Here, we have the same amount of words on the screen as compared to the previous slide, but now the space pops out and creates an invisible box in the lower left-hand corner. Now, creating this shape on this particular slide isn't especially meaningful, but in certain contexts, it could be used as a very subtle metaphor to think outside a box, maybe? As for how to design or space something like this on your own, grids are your friend. I've shown you the center lines of the slide before, but if we bring up a more complex grid, you can see how these text boxes or placeholders were arranged on the slide within the grid. For basic viewability reasons during a presentation in large rooms and webinars and videos, I don't recommend placing any content in this space out here. People's heads, logos, play buttons, low battery messages, warnings, watermarks, and toolbars tend to block this area of the screen. That's why environment is a pillar, by the way, in slide design. As for the rest of the area, notice how on the diagonal here, the text is kind of balanced, almost, on either side of that line. It's not quite perfect, mainly because I wanted to create another line here, lining the front of active space with the edge of designs. Let's look at another example. Here's a picture of a small plant. On the slide, though, it doesn't look so small because the picture fills the space of the slide so much. However, if we deliberately leave space above the photograph showing the plant's potential for growth, then we have a more powerful overall picture. And if I want to add some simple text, we can play around with the placement, finding a balance between the elements that work. And so, in the long journey that both PowerPoint and slide design have taken over all these years, I really hope you can take some of these principles to heart. Space is your friend. It can be used as a shape and a powerful part of your design's message. And grids, they can really help you place and align objects within PowerPoint quickly. There are many tools in PowerPoint to help keep your elements unified, particularly if you are trying to space out or align objects on a slide or across slides. If you'd like to follow along with this lesson, just open up the exercise file, which contains these 2 slides. On the first slide, we have 4 squares that aren't exactly centered within the slide, but we're going to change that using our ruler, grids, and guides in PowerPoint. By default, in later versions of PowerPoint, the ruler will be turned off. To turn it on, go up to your View tab, and in the Show group, you'll see 3 checkboxes. The very first one is for your ruler. To turn on your ruler, simply check that box. Then you should see rulers appear alongside the top and left of your slide area. You can also use the keyboard shortcut Shift-Alt-F9. That will toggle that ruler on and off. Underneath that ruler checkbox, you'll find 2 more checkboxes. One is for grid lines, and the other is for your guides. Now, the guides will just show you the center area or midway area of your slide. Now, with the grids, the rulers, and those guides turned on, it's really easy to see where the center point is of our slide. And just with a click of our mouse, we can very easily drag those squares into position. It's as easy as that. Other handy guides you can access by right-clicking the background of your slide, going down to Grid and Guides, and clicking on this little arrow. You could also add vertical and horizontal guides. Adding a vertical guide will add a straight line that you can move around the background of your slide into any position that you like. So if you want to line it up with the edge of your objects to make aligning other objects easier, you can do that. Just like so. And same goes for horizontal guides. Just right-click, add horizontal guides, and move those into position. And that is how you can use your ruler, grid, and guides to align objects on a slide. Now, jumping over to slide number 2, you also have a wide variety of alignment tools to quickly align objects on your slide. So first off, let's go ahead and select all of our circles, and then go up to our Home tab, to the Drawing group, to the Arrange dropdown, and hover our mouse over Align. Now here are a bunch of alignment options that we can either align to slide or align selected objects. With Align Selected Objects selected, any options you choose here will align those objects based on the position of those objects. So if I choose Align Top, all of those objects will move to the topmost object. But if I were to choose Arrange, Align, Align to Slide, and then choose the option Align Top, now instead it moves it to the top of the slide. So that's kind of the difference there. Now I just hit Undo, back to Arrange, Align. Now with Align Slide selected, if I choose Align Middle, now everything's in the middle of the slide. Now if I want to distribute these evenly amongst themselves, or amongst the objects, I can go back to my Arrange tab, down to Align, switch this to say Align Selected Objects, and then go back and choose Align and Distribute Horizontally. And now all of my circles are aligned in the center of the slide and evenly distributed amongst themselves. And that's a fast way to quickly align objects on a PowerPoint slide. In PowerPoint slide design, creating a unified and similar look for your slides can be done really well, creating something that looks sophisticated, clean, and polished. Or it can go really wrong, creating what some have dubbed death by PowerPoint, habituating the audience with the same design or the same bulleted structure over and over again. A template can be helpful and can save you time, true. But it can also get you into trouble if it's used too much, or if your content or your message doesn't fit into or work with that template. You are ideally creating a cadence, a rhythm, or pattern within your design, with your content, and even with your environment, with your audience. But when you find you have something important to say, something that you want to stand out, that is when you need to break the pattern. But before you do that, you first have to know how to create similarity. In essence, contrast needs similarity. And trust me, your presentation needs contrast. That is what is going to highlight your main message, the most important sticking points, or the action items you want your audience members to take away. But before you can begin to pull out all those pertinent details, you have to plan and streamline your other visual elements. In PowerPoint, you first choose similarity by choosing to reuse a handful of well-chosen layouts from your slide template. Customize these layouts and the template if you must in order to fit your overall presentation. Just be careful if you work at an organization with strict style guidelines. Chances are you have to still follow them, but most of the time there are ways to stay within those guidelines and customize the template too. But if the reason there are guidelines in place is because of a legal department, then usually they are not willing to budge, I've often noticed. Just be sure that any changes you make fit your overall design concept that align to your presentation's audience, message, and the specific environment if known. But when thinking about ways to create similarity, the key elements you will be leaning on the most are color, size, and even shape. If you do choose to use a template, these are the design features that will already be decided for you. So, those are the 3 basic ways within a slide's template to plan for a similar and consistent environment. But there are others too. Orientation can be used to create similarity between objects too. Here we have a bunch of equilateral triangles, but the 3 that are pointing in different directions are easy to spot, even though all triangles are the same size and color and shape. That effect is created through similarity because we have enough triangles all pointing in the same direction. Texture is another unifying element, and one that can be quite useful in several contexts in PowerPoint, especially since PowerPoint gives you so many easy-to-apply shape and picture effects to use, which can be combined to create just about any look. Here I have a slide I created with a simple statistic about bullying. I've made all the elements on the slide similar. The images of the teens are similar, the shapes behind them are similar. Even though they are all different colors, they are all vibrant colors and the same style and texture. Now, if I want to follow the statistic listed above, I can do something to make one of these students stand out, like change the texture. Here, I applied the texture line drawing to both the circle and the picture of the boy in the center. Or, if I want more contrast, I can change the color of the image too. And if this is still too subtle, I can keep tweaking and playing with the contrasting element on that one student to make him stand out more until I reach the desired effect. Perhaps a blur effect is better. But none of that is possible unless the rest of the elements on the slide are similar enough. This slide works because my bullied student in the center contrasts with the brightly colored in-focus photographs of the other students. One final note about similarity that I'd like to leave you with has to do with your audience. Remember, you are designing for your audience, just as you are designing for your content and your environment. If your audience is accustomed to a certain style presentation or seeing slides designed a certain way, departing from that format and structure drastically can be too much of a contrast too. So in speaking of similarity and in keeping with similarity, you also have to keep your audience in mind as well and what they are familiar with. People don't like change. Slides and presentations are no different. If you vary the layout of information too much and too often, the audience must go hunting around for the information, which you may or may not want all the time. Making some information hard to find can be beneficial for memory, but doing it on every slide or even every day can be too overwhelming, overtaxing, and exhausting. As such, through similar colors, sizes, shapes, and other elements, you want to create a unified experience for your audience to guide them through the presentation experience so they know what to expect and only strategically surprise them at the right moments. Like slides need design consistency or similarity, strangely enough, they also occasionally need some contrast to keep from becoming too dull or repetitive. There needs to be a balance between consistency and habituation, where your audience ceases to really see or respond to your slides or content. And the way we can do that is to create strategic contrast. At its very heart, contrast creates focus for a PowerPoint slide and a PowerPoint deck, which in turn helps to clarify and organize the slide's main message and the presentation's overall message. So hopefully, what you choose to contrast on the slide and in the deck coincides with your message's key points. Contrast, much like similarity, is an important part of a design that can communicate a great deal through the use of simple color, size, and shape. And without similarity or similar elements in the design, you can't have contrast. In other words, if all elements contrast with one another, what you have is chaos or clutter, a design that makes no visual sense whatsoever. But this isn't about opposites. It's about finding balance, both within a single slide and across all slides within your presentation. In PowerPoint, the way you create contrast on a slide is the exact same way you create sameness, through color, size, shape, texture, and orientation. Only this time, instead of making the elements similar, you try and vary the elements. In addition to contrasting through size, you can create contrast through color. Now later on, we have an entire chapter dedicated to the topic of color, so this won't be the only time we talk color, not by a long shot. But through color, you can take a slide and pull out a piece of the design, drawing attention to specifically similar areas, just like so. In this example, even without any information in our chunked layout, we can tell that the information in this third slot of our list is somehow more important than the rest, and we can't help but look at it. We can do the same thing with text. Here, nothing about the text really stands out, but I can change the color of one word, potential. Maybe make it green to tie into the color of the plant. And now that word stands out a bit more. You can also contrast through size. Over here, we have two elements that are the same, which at a glance appear unremarkable. But now, when we alter one of the elements and contrast the size greatly, they are not unremarkable. The design is now dynamic. We have something to look at, something to consider. Size and scale make a big difference. Here, it tells a story. and creates a hierarchy and tells us what is most important. We can do this with text too. Coming back to this example, we don't have to just change the color of the word potential to make it stand out. We could instead change the size and make it the most important word in our sentence. Now it really stands out from the rest, and all I did was adjust the size of the font. If I really want to, I can even combine contrasting elements, make it big, and change the color. And another common way to create contrast is through shape. Since it is so easy to design or think about PowerPoint slides in terms of squares and rectangles, one way to contrast is to step outside or break away from this grid and design elements that just don't fit inside of a box. Circles, triangles, any shape that pushes the boundary of the grid can be used effectively. Just be careful in doing so, as this too can get repetitive and overused within a presentation. And I do want to issue a warning about changing the shape of text. PowerPoint comes with some tools that allow you to transform the shape of text, but in a presentation setting where the goal is clear and effortless communication, this completely defeats the purpose. So please, just pretend that this feature does not exist. Changing the font, the alignment, the position, all of those are far better, more legible ways to transform the shape of your text. So yes, just like how you create similarity, you can create contrast through color, size, and shape. But above all, the biggest takeaway from this lesson, it's so important, I'm repeating it, so take notes. Make sure that what you are choosing to contrast in your slide deck is important to your message. When you contrast something, you are putting a big red circle around it, saying, this is important, pay attention, remember it. So whatever you do, when you create contrast, make sure what is contrasted is meaningful. In this chapter, we're going to be discussing color, a topic that many find baffling. But first, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I was super excited when my son began to draw, because it gave me an excuse to go out and buy more coloring books and crayons and colored pencils and spend time in the evenings sitting on floors, hunched over paper, quiet and still, filling in white places with shades of blue, pink, green, or purple. It was nice. It's no wonder that adult coloring books have become so popular now. And even though I love the act of coloring, when it comes to design work, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with color. The act of coloring, sure, I find that calming. Choosing colors, though, especially for presentations, that makes me want to gnaw my own arm off. There's just so many choices and pressure. And let's be honest, people with opinions. If you are lucky, you will be handed a predetermined brand color palette from a company to work with, but sometimes that's not really the case. And it seems the topic of color itself, mixing or blending colors, or even the science of it, our perception of it, it can get quite complicated if we let it be. But let's not make this too hard. Not for presentations, not for an intro design course in PowerPoint. After you become more advanced in design, and if you want to further your studies, be my guest, dive deep. But for right now, here are the 4 key points that you need to know about color. Lesson the first: color should attract, just like in nature. Flowers aren't colorful because they are vain. They use colors to attract bees for pollination. It is a far more effective and seductive tool. For flowers, color is a part of survival, and it's a large part of how they procreate. At a social gathering, say this party, who would you be drawn to? I don't know about you, but in this crowd, I'd find the clown confusing and far too overstimulating for any length of time, so he's out. And now I am betting that your eye is drawn to 2 individuals in particular, considering the remaining choices. And it's the individuals wearing the pops of red in an otherwise dull neutral environment. So when it comes to PowerPoint, let's take a lesson from nature and use color to attract attention. When people think of color, they often haphazardly throw color together without much thought or purpose. When it comes to communication in PowerPoint, though, color is more than just decoration. Color has meaning and should be thought about as other design elements are. Color should also contain contrast and stand out when necessary. On this slide here, notice how color is just everywhere, and as such, we don't really know where to look. All colors here do in fact follow a theme, but there are too many colors to look at. If we go back to our lessons about similarity and contrast, here there is no one color that stands out. Every color has equal weight. But if we were to wash out all the color from the slide, just gray it all out, and now go through and decide what pieces of the design are important, let's say the names of the employees, or maybe the section of the presentation we are on from the navigation hyperlink buttons below, and then highlight those elements with one accent color. Now the eye immediately goes to those spots. The rest of the design elements do not have to be gray, by the way, or even a neutral color. It just has to be the same color, and one that contrasts enough from the accent color. Now, this is an example of how color should contrast to draw out importance. Finally, color should connect. Here's a slide inspired from a poster at my doctor's office. Now, there is a lot happening on this slide, a lot of information to look at, and not necessarily information that is placed close to each other, proximity-wise. But through color, specifically the color yellow, we can connect the information on the slide to what we should be looking at on the nutrition facts label. Now, there is one problem here with our photograph. The photo does have the color yellow too, which is kind of getting in the way, pulling focus away from our key elements. The yellow in the photo is more here for decoration or distraction than there for meaning. But if we were to tone down the color in the photo a tad, now the color in the content really stands out, and we can guide our viewers' eyes to the key pieces of information to help them connect the dots, even though proximity-wise the information is spread far apart on the slide. And so, above all, remember, choose color purposefully. Color should attract and not merely be used for decoration. Color should contrast and highlight important details of your message and connect important points on individual slides and across your slides throughout your presentation. And like a clown at a formal cocktail party, too many colors will confuse and overwhelm your audience. So do be restrained in the use of your color palette. In this video, I'm going to tell you which tools are good to use for color and which tools you should avoid using altogether. So let's begin with the color picker or the eyedropper tool. Now, this is a great tool to use in cases where your company has a color palette, but you don't know the RGB color values, kind of like this image up here. So let's say that we have these shapes and we want to pick up the colors from this image here. First, we need to select a shape, then go up to our Drawing Tools Format tab, go to Shape Fill, and click on the Eyedropper tool. Then all we have to do is hover our mouse over one of the colors that we want, click once, and our shape will pick up the color that we've hovered over. That's all there is to it. Another great time-saving feature to use, especially if your company already has a predetermined color palette, that is theme colors. To show you how theme colors work, let's jump over to slide number 2, where I have a shape and a line drawn. And let's change the theme color for this presentation. To do that, let's go up to the Design tab, go to the Variants group, click on that gallery, then Colors, and then just hover your mouse over any one of these color palettes. You'll see a live preview for any one of those color palettes update immediately on the slide to get a preview for what it looks like. Now, if you want to plug in a company custom colors, all you've got to do is click on Customize Colors and enter in those custom colors right here. Jump over to the Custom tab, and there you go. You can enter in the RGB values right here. Next, all you've got to do is save. And then that color palette is there for you to use anytime you want to use it. Once you have a theme selected, those new colors will then appear anytime you have a shape fill selected or text fill selected. Notice how those colors will update in the theme colors area. So that's another great time-saving tool for you to use. Now, that concludes the great color features in PowerPoint. Let's talk about color features that you should probably avoid using. Underneath these predetermined theme colors, notice there are more colors down beneath it. Now, here are the theme colors, so what are these? These are lighter and darker variations for the set theme colors. Well, what are lighter and darker variations? Well, PowerPoint automatically, based on the colors you select, apply a percentage lighter and a percentage darker for any specific color. So if your company has a set of very specific colors they want you to use, PowerPoint decides how lighter and darker those colors should be, not your company. Not a lot of companies like that. So do check with your company's standards, their design standards, to make sure if it's okay that you use these lighter and darker variations. Sometimes it's not okay. Likewise, underneath these theme color variations, you'll see another area for standard colors. These standard colors, sometimes they're not all that great to use either. In fact, some of these colors, when used in combination like red and green, certain color combinations, they might be dangerous for photosensitive and colorblind users. Therefore, I don't really recommend that you use colors in the standard colors area. Before we talk about tools that will help you create a workable color palette, let's cover a few basic don'ts when it comes to color combinations. There are a few basic color combinations that should be avoided at all costs due to accessibility and other medical reasons. First off, never mix bright red and bright blue. This combination can be nasty for photosensitive individuals. Even in perfectly healthy individuals, this combination can cause eye strain quickly. Likewise, you want to avoid red and green, which is the most common form of color blindness. It's at this point I'd like to remind you that these dangerous colors appear in the standard colors area of PowerPoint. So once again, I strongly recommend you avoid using the colors in this bar. This bar is bad. And speaking of red, red text is almost never a good idea. When projected, something happens to that color in a live setting. For webinar or recorded presentations, depending on the context and the background, you might be able to get away with a red arrow or circle, but red text, that's never a good idea. In fact, when it comes to text, you always want high contrast with the background. There's a wonderful web-based tool out there to help check for contrast, webaim.org's Contrast Checker. You can enter in the foreground color and background color to see if your text meets basic accessibility requirements. But overall, you want your text to be readable and legible. In fact, text should be as simple as possible. No weird gradients, no bevels, no trendy hairline fonts, and of course, no red text. All of these choices, when projected, just fail miserably, even on super large screens. Don't believe me? Just ask Microsoft. In many circumstances, this slide here would be legible in a small boardroom or presented to an individual on a webinar. This slide would be fine, except in this environment. That's why environment is such an important design pillar. So, what do? Well, aside from those don'ts, if you are in a position where you have to create your own color palettes and don't want to spend time researching color theory, there are a few websites and tools that can help you create color palettes. This is color.adobe.com, which is a great tool for creating color palettes following some of the more complex color rules. Here, using this website, you can switch between analogous, monochromatic, triad, complementary, compound, shades, or even enter in your own custom colors. Or if you scroll down towards the very bottom, you can choose the option Create from Image and select an image which will pull in colors from that image. You can move these little tools around and really get specific from where in that image you're pulling those colors from. Another website is colorlovers.com. Here, you can create your own account and save palettes, patterns, and colors, or just browse through the palettes and patterns that others have created recently. I go here a lot to browse their latest trends. Here they grab the colors from popular websites, magazines, and company logos from around the web. There's a lot of great stuff here, so be sure to check this site out. Or even without those online tools, PowerPoint has its own tools that can help. We can build our own presentation colors from this example flyer easily using just the color picker in PowerPoint. Or take a look at your own environment and pull colors from around you or in nature using the tools I've mentioned to help make them all go together. In the next movie, I'll be showing you the next step, which is taking these colors and turning them into a usable color palette or theme in PowerPoint. So stay tuned. We're back in PowerPoint, and I've settled on this as our color palette. Now, to make this palette as our presentation's custom color theme, here's what we are going to do. From the Design tab in the Variants group, let's hover our mouse over the Colors area here and go all the way down to Customize Colors. Here, that will open up the Create New Theme Colors window where we can plug in our RGB colors that our company gave us. But as you can see, there's a lot going on in this window, some of which is quite confusing to newbies of PowerPoint. Let me break this down for you. Now, most theme colors will correspond to a color in a color drop-down in PowerPoint, like a shape fill or a font color. Dark one and light one are typically your text colors. So remember, when it comes to text, you want your text to be simple and to have high contrast with your background. The next two below, dark 2 and light 2, those are typically your background colors, but not always. I usually like to use a dark and light gray here or some kind of other neutrals. Accent 1, this is your main accent color in PowerPoint. This is the color you want to use most often in PowerPoint and the color you want your users of your template to use most often. So choose this color wisely. This will be the default color of both lines and shapes. As such, some designers recommend using a neutral color like gray, or some designers choose to use the primary signature pop color of the company. Just remember though, this is the default line and shape color. Accents 2 through 6, those are the remaining 5 colors that display in the color palette in PowerPoint. Now, as for the last 2 colors shown below, those don't show up in the color palette. These are your hyperlink and followed hyperlink colors for any links in your presentation. You want these colors to stand out, but not like a sore thumb. Personally, I think any color that you choose here is better than those hideous default bright blue and purple that they give you. As for how to actually type in your color values, that's really simple. Simply click this drop-down menu and pick a color. If you don't see the color in here that you want, click on More Colors, jump over to the Custom tab, and enter in that RGB value here. Now, one thing that I do wish that PowerPoint would add feature-wise to this window is the color picker. It would be a lot faster than typing in the RGB values. But until then, you're left typing those values in. And now that I have all of those colors entered into our theme colors area, all we have left to do is to give our theme color a name. And I'm just going to name this something real simple like My Company Theme. And press Save. Now, whenever I want to use this particular theme color, it is going to appear on that Design tab in that Variants group underneath Colors. There it is, underneath Custom, My Company Theme. To apply it, all I have to do is hover my mouse over it, click on it, and now it's going to be applied to all of my slides in my slide deck. In fact, if I select an object like a text box or a shape or any kind of font and go up to Drawing Tools Format and select any object that has a color attached to it, there they all are. There are my theme colors. And that is how you create a custom theme color in PowerPoint.